be kind, be curious, and be present. I think for many people, we have to really seek to understand others before being understood. And I think for many of us, it's going to take us, especially as leaders, to help other people in our organizations to really allow them to empower and inspire each other.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Neha at peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view, integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that's specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and channel that receives more than 200,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. We have with us today JJ DiGeronimo. JJ is the founder of Tech-Savvy Women, offers career strategies for the Women That Work podcast, and is a gender diversity in tech expert. She shares high-converting career strategies for women in tech and STEM to achieve their next level of influence and impact. Her audiences include women and leadership groups, diversity and inclusion initiatives, men as sponsors and allies, leaders and executives, and girls in STEM. Through her keynote and executive sessions, JJ shares effective leadership and inclusion strategies from her 2 award-winning books that have now been featured in many publications, including Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, IT World, Thrive Global, Smart Business, and INC Magazine. With this momentum, she's a repeat keynote speaker for many corporate events. We're so thrilled to have her join us today. Welcome to peopleHum, JJ. It's an absolute pleasure having you over.
Oh, I could not be more thrilled. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. So jumping right into the interview, JJ, you're the founder of Tech-Savvy Women. Can you tell us about the company, its ideologies, and the work that you do there?
Yes, Tech-Savvy Women was an organization I started in 2008 because it was something that I needed. I needed to be with like women that could help me maneuver the landscape of being in my 30s and having children and having a very, very demanding and at times global job. So I brought great women together to connect and engage and find ways to help each other, especially as many of us still had untapped goals.
Right.
And yes, and that has continued to grow. The group primarily is on LinkedIn. There's about 4,500 women. But on the flip side, now we're working with organizations to not only help them find great women, but also promote them and retain them. And so I really feel like it takes both sides of the wheel to be successful.
Absolutely. And the work that you do is wonderful because women are looking out for women. And I don't see how anything can be greater than that. So the work that you do is absolutely amazing. Thanks a lot for sharing that with us.
Sure.
So moving on, you've previously held leadership workshops on several topics, including how busy women leverage mindfulness at work. The post-pandemic scenario has made work-life balance a challenge for many. So in that light, how would you advise busy women to leverage mindfulness at work?
Yes, so mindfulness has not been an easy journey for me. A lot of folks are like, oh, just do mindfulness. But honestly, when you're a high producing human, you really are often focused on what you've just done or what you're going to do next. And mindfulness is really about being in the present moment, which takes training. So it's not something you can just do so easily. You really have to train not only your exterior, but your interior to be present to the present moment, which requires you to be conscious of the thoughts you're having, but not hang on to any one of them. And that took me years to learn. And one of the ways I encourage women and men at work is they can do it right in their seat by just putting their hands on their legs, feeling their feet on the ground, moving their toes around, bringing your posture up, moving your shoulders. I find when you start to sort of move your body and become aware of it, you often are allowed to get in the present moment. And that's when you realize, like, hey, I'm taking up this body. Like, I'm here at my desk. I can feel my fingers. And I feel like many of us are just so productive that we're often planning or reflecting or strategizing, and it often takes away the opportunity to be present, which is the tool that mindfulness really helps you become more aware of.
Absolutely. I feel like it's very wonderful what you just mentioned that, we spend so much time being productive that we don't realize what it is that we're actually doing to be in the moment. And everything that you just mentioned about mindfulness, I feel like that's very important because when we talk about mindfulness, I'm sure everybody has their own version of it. But what you just mentioned is so simple and so easy to implement that when you do it, you'll realize that you're actually doing a great job at what you're doing. So it's sort of just pulls everything together, and that's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, and it gives us the opportunity to realize that we're not a machine. We're not supposed to be
Absolutely.
working so hard every moment, that there's a lot of benefit in the quietness of just having a hot tea or walking outside or just breathing in the air that's around you to be like, okay, I'm going to give myself some space to think through what else is on my schedule. Because I don't know about you, but most of the people here, we're just so busy all the time that we lose ourselves in our schedule.
Absolutely. And it's so wonderful to have this conversation finally because, I feel like the pandemic has just accelerated the change that was bound to happen anyway. So we've all started having these important discussions about what truly matters. And I'm sure that if we were to look at mental health or even mindfulness for that matter, we would have a completely different purview a few years ago than what we do today. So in a way, what caused it is probably not all that pleasant, but then the change that's happening right now is very pleasant, and it's just wonderful to see how leaders are talking more about it.
Yes, and I think for many of us, we have a moment to reflect on
Mm-hmm.
everything we were doing, and it gives us some perspective and also gives us an opportunity to really assess, do I want to be that busy? Was that productive? Is that worth running back to? And I think it just gave us a little bit of a pause. It has thrown many of us into other aspects of our life, whether it's taking care of elders or children or taking care of neighbors that we haven't really done in, some of us decades. So it's been a great perspective for many of us to really understand, what do we want to run towards and what do we not want to do anymore?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we mention the term diversity or inclusion, each one of us supports practicing it. But what happens is that very often our biases on account of being subconscious prevent us from practicing diversity or inclusion to its fullest capacity. So what is your take on that?
I agree. I have biases. We all have biases. And it's not that we're going to get rid of our biases. We're not. But we do have the opportunity to see what we are thinking. Now that I practice mindfulness, I'm more aware of my thoughts. Not every minute of the day, but I do catch myself more often understanding what I'm saying to myself, how I'm categorizing things, how I'm grouping things, what labels I'm putting on. And I even have to autocorrect myself and say, that is not okay, JJ. That's not okay to be thinking this. That's not okay. We're conditioned from such a young age to select, divide, sort out, sort of like marbles. Like we constantly do that as
Yes.
part of our decision structure. And oftentimes that has biases built in that we don't even realize. And until you get really clear on what stories you're telling yourself and what conversations you're having in your head, it's difficult to understand the biases you may be putting out in your own thoughts. Some of us say them, some of us just keep them internally. But it really takes us to be more mindful to understand what we're saying and how we act because of our thoughts. And I think that's what we really need to be aware of. Second, there is a difference between diversity and inclusion. I see a lot of organizations hiring diverse talent, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're being inclusive. Being inclusive is creating a culture that invites diverse thought. And many organizations aspire for diverse thought because there's a lot of research around that really says there's a lot of benefits and advantages and revenue for organizations that can bring different thought to the table. But that does not happen naturally. Just because you hire diverse talent does not mean that you create an inclusive culture where that diverse talent feels comfortable sharing their opinion, ideas, and suggestions. And so it really is a two-part series for organizations.
Right. It's wonderful to understand how hiring them is not the same as giving them an environment where they can flourish and where they can be the best version of themselves.
Yes. And it takes leaders that are self-aware,
Mm-hmm.
mindful, and can compartmentalize their ego, because the
Right.
ego often overshadows our ability to empower others.
Absolutely. So asking you as a leader, and I'm sure that you've also practiced these. So how would you say leaders compartmentalize their, say, emotions towards biases? Or let's say, for example, there's a situation where, we come upon something that makes us realize that this is a bias that, we've unknowingly held. So in that situation, what can leaders do to get rid of it?
Yes, yes. And like I said before, it's really becoming self-aware of how we talk in our heads. And oftentimes you can't do that unless you have some sort of self-awareness. And that
Right.
self-awareness is very difficult to achieve unless you have some sort of practice, which in my case, I use mindfulness practice. I think for many leaders, the ego often is based on fear,
Mm-hmm.
doubt, self-sabotage. Like if you think of your ego, it really is all the things that we don't want to be most honest about, right? Things we're
Yes.
running away from, fears that we're experiencing. And oftentimes that self-doubt then pushes the doubt on others. And so when many women say to me, well, I've encountered people that aren't supportive of me or don't empower me or don't inspire me, I often say, you know what, you can't take it personally because that person is not empowering or inspiring themselves. So what they're sharing with you is how they talk with themselves. So you cannot take it personally. You just have to move on and find the next person, because we're not going to have people all the time supporting and sponsoring us and sharing, our accomplishments and even our goals with other people unless they feel confident, secure, and work from a place of love, which often is not coming from the ego.
Yes, yes, that's wonderful. And it's also a very important reminder for all of us
Yeah.
because, especially in this day and age, we're all going about seeking validation for everything that we do. And given tradition, a lot of employees seek that from their leaders because that's how it's traditionally supposed to be. But then what you just mentioned is so important to remember, and I'm sure that it's going to be a very, very valuable takeaway from the interview.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's something that I've had to move through myself, and it wasn't something that came naturally. I
Mm-hmm.
started mindfulness a few times before I realized that I was really struggling with joy and self-love myself. And it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
until I got to a point where I realized that I don't want to keep pushing and pushing, because many of us know, like, we have aspirations to get to a title or a level of success. But oftentimes when you reach that, you realize it's very lonely and there's not the joy you think is going to arrive when you get to that milestone. And, for me, I had to really do some internal searching to say, what makes me joyful and why am I searching externally for that joy? Why don't I feel joyful just based on my accomplishments to date? And that's really what took me on my journey. And it's a journey that I did not move through easily. It took me a long time because my ego was what drove me all the time, but it also is what's what stole many moments of laughter and fun. And I think I didn't realize how powerful my ego was and how hard it was driving me to the point of pure exhaustion.
Absolutely, absolutely wonderful. So, if you could give any advice to our leaders on their conduct post returning to a physical office setting, what would it be? Because things were different before the pandemic and they're extremely different now. Like you yourself mentioned that, we've understood that productivity is not how we used to take it earlier, in the sense that we used to take it earlier. So, if you were to advise them to be a certain way in a post pandemic workplace, how would it be?
Well, I first just want to acknowledge everything everyone's done to this point. It's been an exhausting year on a lot of fronts, and I think many people have worked actually harder than they've ever worked in their lives, both at home and in the workplace.
Yes.
There hasn't been a lot of moments of joy or breaks or lunches or ways to interconnect with people. So I think as people are starting back into the workforce, my first advice would be go easy, not only on yourself, but on your teams. It's going to be a transition and people are tired and they may even be burned out. That finding ways to have moments of joy at work, whether it's, an hour for lunch, everyone comes and talks about their high point during COVID, to create that culture again. In many circumstances, it could be creating a new culture because people miss their jobs, but they don't miss the grind. And we really need to cultivate organizations that allow us to show up more fruitfully, like where we can bring our full self there, because we all realize we're juggling a lot of things at home and at work, and many of us feel like we have to compartmentalize ourselves, and I think that's going to be very difficult for people for the next few years. And so organizations that really work to empower each other are going to be the most successful.
Absolutely. I love the nuance that you bring to this answer because this definitely puts a lot of things into perspective and talks about how things used to be and how they are going to be. And how, while that is something that we cannot change, what we can change is the way that we approach it. And I feel like that very thing there makes a difference in no matter what you end up doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I think go easy on yourself, go easy on your teams, and look for new ways to connect with each other.
That's wonderful advice. So with that, we've come to the last question of the interview. So do you have a quote that best defines your feelings towards the future of work, workplace, and you?
Well, I think based on what we talked about, I would say be kind, be curious, and be present. I think for many people, we have to really seek to understand others before being understood. And I think for many of us, it's going to take us, especially as leaders, to help other people in our organizations to really allow them to empower and inspire each other.
Absolutely. So I don't feel like we could have ended that interview on a better note than that. So thanks a lot, JJ, for taking your time out today. It was such an insightful conversation, and I'm sure that you've given a lot to think about, to our viewers and listeners. So it was absolutely wonderful having you over. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to staying connected.
Absolutely.